You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneurnetwork.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Annemarie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast, brought to you by the Influence Alliance. And that's the business building community for coaches and consultants who want to build a profitable, scalable business while also make a much bigger impact in the world with their message. And I'm your host, Annemarie Cross. Now, my guest today says we are all leaders, skilled leaders that teach with intention. Everyone else leads accidentally. Joining me on today's show is Denise Cooper. Denise, she's the founder and CEO of Remarkable Leadership Lessons, a company that was founded over 10 years ago to assist C-suite, senior level business leaders and managers in raising their game as contributors to profitability. Now, her expertise and her wisdom are grounded in neuro leadership, in behavioral and psychological principles, along with 25 years of experience. Now, Denise has worked across a wide range of industries and organizations. This includes Fortune 500 corporations, small to medium, mid-market and non-profit businesses, and change is impacting in every aspect of business. And executives, they need leadership skills that inspire trust, enable quick response times, clarifies purpose, and create work cultures where belonging and contribution are foundational principles. I think that we just don't need that in workplaces, but across different industries, absolutely. So today, Denise is going to share how to anticipate change in the workplace and in life, tools that can help us gain influence and decision-making power in the office, and we can use this in other areas of our life as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion work. That is not just about checking boxes. It requires a mindset shift. Lots to talk about, Denise.
Yes, it is.
We were just saying before we went live, can you believe that still in 2021, we're talking about things such as diversity, equity, inclusion, and how are we faring? I mean, you've been working in this area for 10 years specifically in your business, but 25 years experience. How are we going over the 25 years that you've really had experience in this?
I think we're making progress. So we're definitely not there yet. And if you look at the landscape and compare it to just even 15 years ago, we have broadened the definition of what diversity means. Where we were thinking once before was kind of women or gender or race or ethnicity. We've now broadened it to neurodiversity and how we bring people who are different in other ways than just the physicality of diversity and the way we've thought about it. And so we're continually looking at the intersectionality, which we didn't before. We tended to compartmentalize people. Now we're looking at the intersectionality. So you might be a woman, you might be a mother, you might be a grandmother or a granddaughter or something like that. And also, you may be a homemaker and you may be this. And so how do all of those things come and show up both in the workplace and your customer base?
Mm-hmm. It's true, isn't it? Because so often we have heard, well, when you're at work, what stays at work is at work, don't bring your life with you. Whereas we know that that's ridiculous. You don't just, flick a switch and there you go. It all impacts one another. But if we think about what many of us, all of us, unless you've been living on another planet, have experienced over the last 2 years, there are a lot of things that have impacted us that is going to impact how you show up, how you think, how you respond to certain things. So if previously we weren't looking at that whole scope of things, we said, this is important, we need to address that because this is going to impact and come through into the workplace, then we've kind of missed the point. So let's talk about that word that some people love, change. Others people think, no, you can keep your change. But you say, how to anticipate change in the workplace and in life? What are some insights you can share here, Denise?
Well, I think first thing is that right now, if as you said before, unless you're on a different planet, we have been under tremendous change. And this idea of the new normal is probably an erroneous title. We are reinventing what looks like work. In America and some other countries, industrialized countries, one of the things we've had the luxury of, because we're quarantined, people are looking at employment places and saying, you know what, it was lousy before. I'm not putting up with that anymore. So we've got the great resignation going on. And so it's redefining what that looks like. More men are wanting to be complete partners, and they're trying to figure out what that means in the workplace as well as in their homes. It is a big struggle. And so as a result of what's happened over the last 2 years, people are redefining and losing their footing on what it means to be a human being and successful, both at work and in their home. And before we used to talk about, which I thought was a misnomer, work-life balance. It's really about work-life integration. Technology has given us this wonderful, wonderful opportunity, with downsides, obviously, that we can work anywhere for at least 40 to 50% of the population. And it's to move more and more towards that as we understand the impacts on customer service, et cetera. But because of that, it requires that where before the rules were made by the employer, now as employees and freelancers and gig workers, whatever the language you want for contracting work, we now have to take more ownership on how work shows up, but how we interact with other individuals.
I was going to say that. I mean, the landscape has changed as far as, well, I'll use the term who holds the power, but who holds the most influence, who makes the decisions. And therefore people previously had to adapt and adjust to suit the employment, the employer, if you will. But now there has been experience there that we have been able to work at home and see how more productive for some people, and myself included. I'm far more productive I obviously have a very small business, but I have more energy, if you will, because I'm not interacting with people. And some people have really had some self-awareness in that I actually operate much better out of a workplace. But now we need to then go and have that conversation and maybe even change the mindset, if you will, of employers to say that we can continue to work in, we use the term here hybrid, where it's a balance between in the workplace and then also at home as well. Is that kind of a term that in the US as well?
Yes, it is gaining much more popularity, and it's both sides. So some people are finding that they do much better at home. But on the flip side, there are other people who find that their productivity has crashed.
Plummeted, yeah. So how do we then start to have a conversation? Because obviously, as you said, we want to be able to have an open dialogue and come to a win-win for all, win for the organisation, win for the employees, and ultimately the impact that we have for stakeholders, shareholders, customers, and so forth. But what if someone comes up against an employer who says, no, we're not interested? Is that what you're saying is prompting some of this big resignation that we see going on?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got more opportunities and new ones are showing up. And the good side of it is that for many people, having a LinkedIn education portfolio is now opening up opportunities that they probably didn't have to have before. And employers are really wrestling with this power dynamic of now it's not just me demanding that my employees change. I've got to change as a leader. I've got to embrace some beliefs and some structures and some values that before they weren't rubbing and bumping up against each other, but now they are. And I'll tell you the one that I've worked with leaders for a very long time. And it's this idea of, how do you know work is getting done? Do you actually physically have to see someone to know that work is getting done? Or can we judge the work by the results that people deliver to us? And does it matter that you do it during a normal, 8 to 5 or 7 to 4 time frame? Or can we allow people to make sure that they have clear deadlines, which is a change for most supervisors? You have to have very clear deadlines, and you also have to have an understanding of what boundaries are so that people can go off, do the work, and deliver a product that meets the specifications. That's a huge change in what we talk about leadership and management.
Yes. And I like the way that you've confirmed the importance of what is the outcome that is required, because if we start to measure on that and someone is able to complete a particular task in 2 hours versus 5 hours in the workplace, just a bum on a seat taking 5 hours does not mean that they're highly productive. So I love that whole mindset shift. And just to hear you say that, I mean, you run your own business, so do I. That's the kind of thing that we do anyway, don't we?
Yes.
We kind of measure it. So is that what you're seeing and what you have seen, that in, say, corporate America in your instance, but here in Australia, are workplaces, then corporations, not really seeing the value of, hang on, we have to change, or they haven't been doing that? Is that kind of what you're saying? They're measuring more on the amount of time that someone is in the workplace?
Yes. And most measures are performance measures are around time. And when, and so that's got to change in terms of how we think about it and routineness of work. So one of the stories and things I like to talk about right now is, pre-pandemic. So I own my business, just like you've said. When I do a training or a speech, I would just simply create my PowerPoint. I'd send it off to my printer, and generally I could pick it up within an hour or two. Post-pandemic, I just did this last week. I created it. I put it in the portal, and the portal told me it would take 3 to 5 days to get it back. So fortunately, I had a good relationship with my printer, picked up the phone and said, hey, what happened? And he tells me about, people are not showing up. We've got all this work that's come in. We're not getting supplies in, so we don't always have the paper. And so we just want to make sure that we meet your expectations. I did get it over to them. And what normally would have taken me a couple hours to get done, an hour to do it and send it and go and pick it up. Actually, I timed it. It took nearly 5 hours for me to get that project done. Wow. That's the thing that is invisible work that we didn't talk about before, because it kind of went within a certain amount of expectation. But today, because we've got these interruptions just in general, we're not conscious of it. And so people are overwhelmed. They feel like they can't win and they can't succeed. As a result, they're saying, well, if I can't succeed and my boss has no idea on how to help me, then why am I here? Because all of us wake up every morning to feel like we are contributing.
Yes. So true. I mean, as you're sharing that, Denise, I can think of someone that I spoke to who is in the retail environment, and the management continued to put so much workload, yet tools that were available, the resources, the staff was not available. And basically management said, don't care how you do it, just do it. And in that instance, it's like, well, okay, let me get out my crystal ball. It's almost like that. I mean, and as management then, as a business, are we providing, I think, an opportunity for our staff to share? Because, sometimes the greatest impact and change can come from the team if you give them an open door policy and that they feel safe in bringing that up, aren't they? Because they're there doing the work, so they're most likely able to come up with solutions as well. How are you finding that management is open to the suggestions and so forth of the team? Is this going to be very important for organizations moving forward? Because we mentioned in the introduction that organizations, businesses, executives need to have the ability to change, enable quick response times and so forth. We have to be open to possibilities of discussing how can we do this better, what tools can we get, don't we, moving forward?
Yes, and that is, I think we've been moving towards this new form of leadership, which, we've seen studies over and over and over that say women are better leaders. Sanger Fullman's done one, Lean In, and other organizations have actually done very in-depth longitudinal studies about when it comes to increasing productivity and balancing mental health and making people feel like they can be capable in it, women tend to score higher. And it's primarily because we've had this male model of being a hero. So the hero comes in, there's a problem, and oh my goodness, I've got the solution. And the solution comes from that leader, where women are far more likely to say, you know what, help me define what the problem is, and then what are the things that we need to get done. They tend to be better at prioritization, or at least the best women leaders out there. They really focus on prioritization, making sure that if they set a good vision, what the goal is, they manage resources really, really tightly. They understand what it takes to get the job done. And then they have really good follow up and follow through.
And also, too, I think women have the ability, if I think of some women leaders that I've had an interaction with previously, they are not the ones that ask the questions, and they're not fearful of having their team step up and shine. You know, they create an environment in which people can contribute. There's no ego there. And I think that's so important, isn't it? Don't have any ego. If someone else shines in a certain area, that does not mean that you don't shine in other areas. Maybe not that particular area, but I think that whole comparison and ego needs to come out of all workplaces. Because at the end of the day, we're all working toward a common goal, isn't it? And as long as that vision and that mission is one that benefits all parties and not just obviously, you know, skewed to only benefiting one, then everyone will contribute. They want to, because ultimately the outcome is going to impact everybody.
And that's the interesting thing, because so leaders and employees are starting to push this idea of more collaborative thinking, more, hey, how can we all just focus on this, figure it out, pull new technology, connect with our networks to find out who's doing this over here, or can we take this idea from here and apply it here? But the HR systems are not necessarily moving as fast.
Right.
So performance management now looks like, did you hit the goal, which we set in January or July, depending on when your cycle starts, and then it doesn't change during the year. It's not adaptive. And it doesn't highlight or make positive those individuals who are flexible, agile, and adaptable in the workplace, whether they're a leader or the employees. That is something that, because change is coming so fast, and you know, right now we're talking about the remnants of the pandemic and where that's taking us, but we really aren't looking at the impact of technology on jobs, from driverless cars and trucks to you know, what social media is doing and what it means to be marketing to multiple generations, multiple kinds of ethnicities and diversity, etc. How do you create an inclusive look so that your product is actually getting the broadest market views that you can possibly get? And that's got to be reflected inside. And yet the HR systems tend not to be that flexible.
Yes. What would you suggest would be some changes if someone is listening and watching today and they are in charge of developing some of these HR systems? What are some changes you would like to see?
Oh, the first one is I would love to be able to get rid of this asking during the interviews, how much money did you make? We know what the job pays. We know what the market says. Figure it out and then pay the person in that. What it does is it causes the person on the interviewing side from having to guess and be in a place of fear, because we want to be picked, right? We want to be in this company. We've done the research and we say, hey, this is a great place. I want to be here. So stop creating systems where there's a power dynamic in the recruiting. We should be looking for collaborative approaches in doing that. In the workplace, when we're talking about what are the skills, what is it that we really want from employees? Well, one of the things we're seeing, when you need fast, agile workforces, everyone's got to be good at giving and receiving feedback, understanding what decisions are. And so instead of just training management to do that, we want to see every employee having the ownership for providing feedback, accepting feedback, and being accountable for the integrity of telling the truth and offering up what the truth is, and not hiding when we're not doing well, but really being able to talk about that.
Yes, brilliant. And then getting the skills to be able to provide feedback in a way that enables the win-win too. I mean, because and I think an appreciation of different communication styles, awareness of colleagues and how they interact can be such an eye-opener. And I know that there are many people who can support the team in being able to do that. Love those suggestions. And someone is saying here, agree, get rid of the money power play. It has to be a win-win. I remember years ago I was in the career industry, and when I was supporting executives in doing the whole salary negotiation, we always said you need to go from a mindset of a win-win-win, because you could negotiate an incredibly high salary package, but at the end of the day, you've got to contribute to the organization for them to be able to afford keeping you on.
Yeah.
So you need to, there's so many more things at play, but I definitely agree with that. So you've talked about some of the changes you would like to see HR make that's going to impact more of that collaboration or that collaborative workplace, but you also would like to share some tools that can help us to gain influence and decision-making power in the office. What do you see is working really well that we need to know about? What are some insights here?
Well, as I said before, probably the best way to shift your culture and to prepare people to be able to adapt to change is to think about how people go through change. And it's more than coming up with the templates and the speeches and the scripts that we have to put people through, but it's really understanding the emotional toll that change has to go through. How do we help people go through change, which in and of itself causes us to be defensive, fearful, and uncertain? And so how do we create conversations, supervisor to employee, employee to employee, that don't trigger us, but help support us through that process, knowing that uncertainty is kind of the opposite of what we desire, because as humans, we want control and we want predictability. And change kills both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes we have heard in the past, and I'm not sure if this is still something that will pop its head in workplaces, but don't bring your emotions to the workplace.
Yeah.
And sometimes men will say that. So I'm not having a dig at men. Men and women, we're both equally important. We can't live without one another. So let's just stop the power play in that aspect. But, even anger, and a response, a reaction, a behavior, guess what, is driven by emotion.
Yeah.
And I think with the emotional upheaval and things that people have experienced, we have to provide in the workplace an opportunity for people to have a discussion. Otherwise, it's just going to get bottled up. What would you say? What would you encourage businesses to do that will enable not or force people to bottle their emotions because, hey, we don't have emotions in the workplace? What would you say to that?
I'd say that if you refuse to admit that people are human and being human is about navigating our emotions, then you're probably not getting the performance that you want. And you're also probably deluding yourself. Because we are always dealing with it. So here's one emotion that we all love, right? Competition, the passion to be competing, to be the best. We're fine with that emotion. So we already do deal with emotions in the workplace. Managers every day have to deal with disillusionment. I thought I was going to get there. We didn't get there. What does that look like? We all are dealing with what pressure does to us. So we're already doing it. What we've done is put our head in the sand and said that they don't exist. And then we tell the employee or we tell the manager, deal with it. Don't bring it, don't show it. But what we've done is we really are dealing with it. We've just are trying to deal with it in a destructive manner rather than in a productive manner.
Yeah, totally agree. I remember a while ago, Denise, I had an interview with someone who shared. Actually, it was a Zoom call, a connecting call, and he was sharing how one workplace encouraged the team to sit around the table and share one or two events that was significant for them in their lives and that they believe had shaped their character today. And it was interesting that as people continue to share, I remember him sharing, one gentleman was sharing that his grandfather and father, they, were in the war and this and that, and actually in his country, and the turmoil that he had been through as a young child and had to look after his siblings and so forth. And just through sharing that story, being aware of it, his team members around the table could see that he may have come across as very abrupt and very direct, but it was because he was trying to keep the team safe, and trying to handle a lot of those things. It was completely shifted the mindset and the beliefs of, the
How
team.
people looked at him. Yeah,
the team
how they
members.
viewed him. And
Yeah.
that's the important part, because I'm not advocating that we embrace people, crying all the time or being angry or stomping out of a door or anything like that. But, I just got off the call with a senior leader who is reorganizing their organization. And we had to I talked them through, how are you planning for people to go through this process? Because you're going to put them in positions that they may or may not be ready for. You think they might be ready, but you really won't know they're ready until you put them in that position there. And so how are you going to support them through the learning curve of the new position that they're in, so that they feel confident, they feel like they're going to be able to make decisions, that they're going to be able to maybe not do it to 100%, but that it's okay to be on a learning journey. And so those are the kinds of nuances of the emotions that we really have to think about. Prize employees, because they made it through the reorganization, they feel, they need to have the support to know that someone is going to help them and not kill them if they make a mistake, right?
Yes.
Killing being you're going to lose your job, or you're not going to get your raise, or you're going to get, screamed at or something like that. But help them learn how to do it and to plan in the organization, the pacing for the work, to allow people to really be able to learn the new jobs, learn the new structure, and create the relationships that they need. That overlay that with the diversity that sits in your workplace. Mm-hmm. So what are people bringing to work? If we're still in this hybrid model, you don't know that that person's school may have gone down because they had COVID come through, and they have a child at home now that may be online, and they're worried that child is actually getting the education that they need so that they can compete in the world. We don't know that, if we're not allowing people to have some idea and to be able to talk about it. In America, we've got Black Lives Matter. We always have this fear as a Black person, as a woman, that we're not necessarily safe. And so when we come to work not feeling safe, and then we project that because we bring all of that to work with us, how are we having conversations or having an open dialogue so that I can feel safe in my workplace? Mm-hmm. I can trust that I'm not going to be harmed either emotionally or physically in the workplace.
Yes, so important. I think, as you said, leaders need to now be able to navigate through that, be able to recognize when things may need to be. I mean, some people require a little bit more support and, as you said, ensure that there's an environment you're creating that they do feel safe to come forward, because there's nothing worse that you encourage someone to step forward and then all of a sudden, their team or you as the individual doesn't know or laugh, those kind of things are the worst thing that can happen, isn't it, in the workplace where someone does come out. So there's a whole lot of different things there that businesses, as you said, and leaders need to now navigate through. And if they're not sure, get the support you need, because I think, how you move forward, as we mentioned in the introduction, change has never been as quick as it has. And there's a saying, isn't there? I'll probably botch it up, but the faster we move through things, we realize the faster things go with the technology. And have those mechanisms in place. Now, I know we're just about at the end of the interview, and throughout this conversation, you've been able to talk about, kind of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'd love for you to share just some mindset shifts, if you will. So it's not about checking boxes, but mindset shifts. What are some mindset shifts that obviously we've talked about some of the employers, the leaders, and management need to do? Happy for you to share a couple more in that area too. But the mindset shift of the workers, because I think all of us have to
Mhm.
start thinking about, how can I impact positive change? What can I do to change my mindset? That, Denise, you could think that together these shifts can make an incredible difference in how we show up, how we do our work, and ultimately deliver, the best service product that we can for our customers.
Well, I think the first thing that we all have to do is remember that we're human. That's the first thing we have to do, and we're imperfect. And so being able to discern, there are going to be people who we talk a lot about microaggressions, macroaggressions in the workplace and in life in general. But how do we create workplaces where somebody might make a mistake? Maybe they should know, so pronouns, and some people have difficulty remembering pronouns for people. And yet how do we have this conversation, employee to employee? And then when someone makes a slight, because we get embarrassed and we say the wrong thing afterwards, right? How do we help correct that person, make sure that they understand that this is important to make sure that we're including people? So I think, it goes back to something I said earlier. If in a workplace, if a leader is really interested in truly having high productivity, then they've got to deal with the idea of, how do we get everyone to be able to give and receive feedback without damaging productivity, without damaging relationships in the workplace? How do we bring humanity, equity, and inclusion into the workplace so that on both sides, because we all can't know everything, but we've got to be able to learn about each other. Tell me about your background. Help me understand why this is important. We have to be able to hear feedback. It's about hearing, and hearing with empathy. It's about learning how to hold people accountable compassionately for their time and how we manage to work, etc. But it's also about holding all of us accountable for being able to risk and have conversations that might be uncomfortable, and sticking with it so that we can all learn more about each other and we can begin to co-create and collaborate much better.
Yes, so important. One of the things that I've heard time and time again from people such as yourself who are working at the coalface, really, with organisations and their teams, is that if the leadership don't direct this, and they hope, well, no one's talking about it, so I guess we don't need to worry about it or talk about it. If you're not contributing and creating an environment where there is narrative, where there is communication, and guess what? You're the leader of your team. So you should start that, or, what wonderful way as a leader to be able to start that dialogue. Even if people aren't talking about it, they're in front of you, or you're not hearing about it, they are talking about it. And if you don't contribute to the narrative, your team will make up narrative, won't they? And that's happening. And then if you don't address that, by the time you hear about it, there's a lot more damage control, putting out the fires, if you will, that you need to do. So what I'm saying, Denise, if someone's listened today and thought, well, we don't have to have that in our workplace because we're fine, no one actually ever talks about that. They're talking about it, aren't they? And they will talk about it. And you have to get something in place to be able to manage this and support your team through this.
And I think leaders have to understand the leakage that comes from that. Yeah. When you have things that are undiscussable, then what that says is, if I perceive what failure is undiscussable, then I'm not going to tell you. And then you have other secrets. The lack of transparency filters out into other parts of it. So this idea of creating a workplace where feedback and we can actually discuss things that might be uncomfortable is really important, because how you do anything is how you do everything. And if I can't discuss these things over here, I'm going to be reluctant to discuss these other things because I think you don't want to hear bad news. I think you don't want to be uncomfortable as a leader. So if I sense that you don't want to talk about uncomfortable topics, then guess what? I'm not going to talk to you about all uncomfortable topics. And so it's really important for leaders to understand that setting the bar in terms of how it shows up is really important.
So true. And I know that we've just scratched the surface in what we've talked about today. Then this is what you can support organizations and leaders do. So share a little bit more about how people can connect with you, Denise, and how you can best support them.
Oh, I would love to be able to come into organizations and generate conversations and facilitate conversations around how we're going to change, how we're going to learn how to collaborate and co-create in the organization. People can find me on LinkedIn, Denise Cooper, or you can go to my website, which is remarkableleadershiplessons.com.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Denise, sharing your expertise. I loved our conversation, and certainly recommend that anybody who is listening that has really connected to what Denise has shared, then reach out and have a conversation with her today. All right. Thanks once again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, listeners, for sticking around and hearing me talk.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.